Welcome to Business Class, a podcast for people wanting to upgrade their thinking, upgrade their learning, and upgrade their life. I'm your host, Eugenia Panderhos, founder of Business Class Collective, best-selling author, and life coach. If you're an entrepreneur, a startup, or someone who dreams of reaching their full potential, then you're in the right place. You'll feel empowered and inspired to design the life you've always wanted. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the show. I hope you're well. I hope you're having a lovely week. This week, I'm thrilled to be bringing you Chris Radbone, the Chief Executive of MedicAlert Foundation. Chris has extensive health and human services data and consumer engagement expertise across various platforms, including privacy, cybersecurity, IT, and improving business systems and processes. And he does this through collaborative partnerships that unlock value and increase organisational capability. His planning and financial accounting expertise has enabled innovative sharing and greater use of sensitive data for policy and decision makers across a range of government and community-funded programs. Chris has also led the team at SA and NT DataLink and the design of Australia's most trusted data platform, Secure Unified Research Environs, and the acronym is SURE. He is recognised nationally and internationally as leading and enabling the ability for South Australia and the Northern Territory to partner nationally on health and community-based decision-making evidenced by analysis and research. Currently, Chris is Executive Director of MedicAlert and he sits on various boards. One of his favourite quotes is, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And that's from a 1675 letter by Isaac Newton. Chris, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you join me on Business Class Collective. Let's start by sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, your family, your education.
Right. I'm an accountant from my background. Having grown up in a large family, there was 6 children. What I had was the ability to negotiate with people and get best outcomes. So we worked very hard as a family, and I had an interest in money and resources. And so I left school not necessarily knowing what I was going to do, and ended up studying at night school and doing accountancy and then working as an accountant. And a big influence in my early career was sports. I was always a sports person too. So I ended up playing league football for the Sturt Football Club and played about 73 games at a time in the early 80s when there were people like Neil Craig, Rick Davies, playing against people like Barry Robran, Malcolm Blight, Russell Ebert, that sort of thing. So I ended up going to university then and doing accountancy and economics. And that sort of shaped my life ever since, I suppose.
Fantastic. You were in good company at the Sturt Football Club.
Well, my coach at the time in my early career was a fellow named Jack Odie, who was called the Master. And he took me under his wing as a young, bright player, I suppose. So it was a good experience.
And I suppose you would have learned a lot about team effort.
Yes, it was an interesting one because obviously for success, in the old adage that working together as a team will beat a team of champions. The idea that you can achieve a lot more by working together. And I know my experience at the Sturt Footy Club, there was an interesting thing where Jack Odie could talk to each person individually and he'd say almost a different thing to each person, and in fact could say exact opposite to one person that he said to the other to get the most out of that person to perform. And then we had a change of coach. So John Halbert became the coach, and the dynamics in the team changed. There was an elite group of highly skilled players, and then there was the rest of us who were the others. And so you did feel that as a player, the difference, that you had a team within a team, which for me didn't actually work.
It's interesting you should say that. I've had conversations with some friends of mine who have youngsters playing football at the moment and spending too much time on the bench because their coach, even though they're like 9 or 10, their coach seems to think they've got their star group. So I think it's a really difficult thing. And I think you probably find that across the board in not just sport, but workplaces and team building and what have you. So I'm sure that experience would have informed your team building.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be a football coach as I was playing league. When I went to university, I became a tutor at the Scotch College in the boarding house up at Torrens Park. And as part of being a league footballer and being at Scotch in the boarding house, I got the pleasure of coaching several of the teams over that time. And I remember on one occasion, I had a young fella who really wasn't the best player, other players that were a lot better. But I ended up putting him on the ground. And then from the side of the ground, I could say, now run to the right. He ended up marking the ball, and then he ended up kicking a goal. And that was a real joy in the sense of this player who was sort of not one of the stars, who was actually able to, achieve greatness. So, yeah, quite interesting about how you build people up.
You gave him a moment of glory and he rose to the challenge. I love that. Chris, you've enjoyed an interesting career across various non-for-profit, welfare, university, government and private sectors in Australia and the UK. Can you share some of that journey?
Because business is about money and finances, having an accounting and an economics degree is fundamental around how business operates. And so in my early career, I then actually worked part-time while I finished my economics accounting degree. And what I did was I worked for some really large companies. One of them was Bennett and Fisher. The business was taken over by CSR, Colonial Sugar Refinery. They had the brands like Anchor Foods. So that was in the food industry, and I worked for San Remo Macaroni Company, a very successful and high-performing organisation. And so I left there to actually join Uniting Communities, where I applied for the job of accountant and ended up being offered the job of the senior accountant. And that was looking after things like Lifeline, Goodwill shops, some drug and alcohol counselling, aged care, homeless services and things. And so I did that with Uniting Communities. Back then it was called The Mission. I did enjoy that, although the interesting thing was in terms of values and ethics in running an organisation, I had this situation where the Right Court, which was a little homeless day centre, had been collecting money to buy a commercial washing machine so that the homeless people could wash their clothes during the day. And so they'd been doing some fundraising, would dutifully come into my office with an envelope full of money and I'd bank it. And finally they came to me and said, right, we've got the $770 now collected so we can go and order the new commercial washing machine. This is back in the 80s, and that was probably equivalent to, $2,000 or $2,500 today to buy a washing machine. So it was quite a solid one. So I said, nope, leave it with me. I'll get that organised, and went to put the requisition in, the purchase order, to get it organised. And I'm the senior accountant there, so I'm sort of 2 or 3 from the top of the organisation in the sense of finances. And I was told, unfortunately, that, no, I'm sorry, Chris, you can't organise that. You don't understand. These people have been collecting money, dutifully bringing it in. And I was told something like, no, you don't understand, Chris. That money goes into consolidated revenue. That's part of the organisation's revenue. That's not their money. And if you can talk to them, they can probably put it in the budget and have a new washing machine purchased for next year. My problem was the manager of that homeless shelter, right court as it was. I'd been to university with him, and I had the job of going down there and saying, look, I'm very sorry. I've got to tell you that I can't actually get the washing machine for you until next financial year. And for me, that was where an organisation's priorities weren't quite right. Noting at the time, 5KA, a local radio station here in Adelaide, had been sold. The money from that, from a bequest, as in someone who passed away who owned 5KA, put that in their will that would then be donated to Uniting Communities for $7 million. And that was a lot of money. So I was sitting on a war chest of money of $7 million, and I couldn't go out and spend $770 of money that had been raised for a specific purpose. That was really hard for me.
It would have been a huge challenge for you, but also an obvious divide in the ethos of that organisation and commitment to the community. And that goes back to culture, it goes back to red tape, it goes back to power and position, and probably forgetting the purpose of why they exist.
I did suffer some ethical challenges, and in the end I had to leave because I just couldn't reconcile what I saw were the mission and objectives weren't what I saw being supported in the actual work. So that was probably a career limiting move, in that it would have been easier for me to stay there. But I decided to travel and work overseas, probably opened up different doors and avenues for my life.
They say one door closes and another opens. Accountancy, science, and business is your zone of genius, I would say. The marriage of opposites, because you don't often get that combination, but somehow they seem to intersect. How did your interest develop for this to be your life's purpose?
So this idea of a purpose in life, I did grow up in a Christian family, a sense of an understanding of values beyond yourself and the benefit of giving to others to make more of what's possible. An example there was at age 11, I joined the St. John's Ambulance Brigade and was a cadet and a trainer, and then eventually a senior as part of the St. John's as a volunteer. And I know for me, I used to go out to the Kensington sports field, which I think is now Pembroke College. And the sports every Saturday would have all the athletes running, and I'd be there to look after them as a first aid officer. Now, in reality, I should have probably, because I was a very good sports person, I should have been out there running myself rather than sitting there putting Band-Aids on cut knees and things like that. But part of this discussion around building on what you're good at and taking up opportunities is probably where it comes up. And it's an insight into what's needed around people. An example there was, again, when I was at university, I actually went to university slightly late. I worked before I went to uni. And midway in the first half of the year, I thought, okay, I'm going to have a break from around November through till March from university. So what am I going to do? So I sat there and I wrote letters to several Aboriginal communities in Central Australia to say, look, I'm an accountant, I've got some experience or bookkeeping experience. Have you got some work that I might be able to help out with? And sure enough, within 10 days, I had a telegram, which is showing my age, a bit of paper arrive in an envelope at the door saying, yes, we'd love to have you. So for 2 of my university breaks, I took off and went out to the desert in Central Australia at a place called Warburton Ranges. It was an Aboriginal community of 500 people. And, the experience that gave me around just being in a completely different culture to what I grew up with, and seeing the trials and tribulations of Indigenous culture under threat from commercial interests and advertising and health and education challenges that you'll know. So that was a really rich experience I had just as part of what I might call growing up, if you like, in my early career.
You jumped in with 2 feet, I would say. But what a wonderful experience.
Yeah, so the science stuff is quite interesting because at the community, and I can't remember if it was the first year I went or the second year I went over that, it's the hottest time of the year in central Australia, that time of the year. So from November through till January, end of January, February. And they had an anthropologist who was part of the community to build a museum in the community. And we'd work during the day, and you can understand it's really hot. So it's 50 degrees in the shade, during the heat of summer. And a bit like Midnight Oil with, they've got a song, Stars Over Warburton, which is one of their songs. But that whole desert and heat thing. And what would happen is late in the afternoon, we'd then get in the car and we might go exploring. And so we'd, in the car or in a four-wheel drive out to some of the sort of valleys and part of the desert. And, you'd find caves there where you'd go inside and there was rock art on the caves, and then there'd be grinding stones inside the cave. And we'd be there with the local Aborigines and say, can you tell us anything about that? And their comment was something like, oh, that was the people who were here before. And from a perspective of time, does that mean 500 years ago? Does that mean 5,000 years ago? Does that mean 20,000 years ago? It was a really deep experience of just time in what was, desert in Australia.
Not as we know it when we look at a clock or a watch or our iPhone. A couple of years ago, I went up to Catherine Gorge in the Northern Territory, and the remarkable art, the stone-faced wall art, was just incredible. And it had codes. It had codes that if you stood at a certain place, you would find that there was food in that direction, or potatoes or yams in that direction. Like they were like little maps, if you like. Absolutely fascinating. I just was in awe of it. And it was just such a beautiful experience.
So there's an interesting segue to this talk we're having today, because part of the history of the Indigenous communities was oral history. So it wasn't necessarily written down, notwithstanding the rock art and the ability to see things and experience things. So, for example, we'd go out to the desert and there'd be a mountain, and as white fellas, we'd want to climb up the top of the mountain so we can see a lot further. And the Aboriginal people would sit down in their car and wait for us at the bottom of the hill, and we'd trudge up the top of the hill and believe we can see all this detail and see these things. And I sort of said to them, why don't you come up and enjoy the view? They said, well, what are we going to see up there? We already know we're down here on the ground where we can actually see what's going on. And this whole idea, we think as a Westerner, you come up and you get this great panoramic view into the mountains in the distance. But what is it you actually see? Whereas if you're right close to the ground, the nuance of every plant, every track, every tree, you're right in touch with nature, I suppose, and what's going on. And that did teach me a lot. So I ended up doing an environmental science postgrad degree as well, around looking after the environment. But that's a story. Can I tell that story? It's around Kerry Packer.
Mm.
So Kerry Packer, for those people, he's got a son named James Packer now who runs a casino, or tries to. So he was a media mogul and had things like Women's Weekly and a number of Channel 9 and all these other interests. And so in Adelaide, he bought a toxic waste treatment business in Adelaide. And I was working for a large accounting firm, KPMG. And my job was to go down and look after this new business that Kerry Packer had bought and sort out their accounting systems and their finance and their IT and all that sort of thing. And on staff, they also had an engineer and a manager, like a plant manager. there were three of us working there as the senior people in this operation, and Kerry Packer had a reputation for business. So he's a big end of town, and my job every month was to produce the financial reports that would then be sent through to their board meetings every month. And so there was a lot of deadlines on making sure I could get the finances in and the reports sent back to, in this case, Melbourne, and then consolidated into the board papers that would go to the board on the revenue. And what I had this discussion, Kerry then invested in the business by building a medium temperature incinerator. What was there before were these, what I call cesspools. So that was like an open area where people would just pour liquid waste into this open, swampy sort of dam thing, and there was a number of them. And that was the solution to this, how to treat toxic waste. And from my perspective, it was a bit disheartening. But moreover, when they commissioned the medium temperature incinerator, there was a place called Bega down on the southern New South Wales, northern Victorian coast there, where they too had the opportunity of having a medium temperature incinerator put down there. However, the local community got up in arms and said, no, we don't want this in our community. And so it never went ahead. However, in suburban Adelaide, we had a incinerator, and the theory was you put all these toxic things into this incinerator and it'd raise them to such a temperature where the covalent bonds of all the chemicals inside would break. So you'd end up with carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, wouldn't have all the really nasty chemicals. However, if you didn't get the temperature right and you didn't quite scrub it right, then what would spew out the top of the medium temperature incinerator would still be pretty nasty. And so I used to drive my car down there twice a week. Paint work on the car got all pitted with what you call acid rain. So I looked at the Duco of the car and it was just completely spotted with pock marks from what I deemed was the chemicals released out of this medium temperature incinerator. It got to a point where Kerry woke up to saying, at the time there was a fellow named Senator Graham Richardson, who elevated the environment portfolio from being sort of next to nothing, being really important. And at that point, Kerry said, look, this business is too risky for me in my reputation and as a business. So he then went about and sold that business to get out of any liability or risk that business entailed. So interesting thing about big business. And they made lots of money out of it. That's the other point I should say.
Don't know how people are making decisions that influence entire populations. And I think for Bega, if I'm not mistaken, that's cheese making area.
That's right. So they didn't want the risk to their livelihood. So it was that experience of working for Kerry Packer and that toxic waste thing that drove me then to go and do some postgrad environmental science. The plant engineer said to me, the solution to pollution is dilution, which for me didn't necessarily ring true or didn't feel very ethical or sound to me.
Is that plant still there?
I believe it is. It was bought by another big company called Cleanaway.
That was happening to your car. You can only imagine what was happening to people living nearby, the people working there, and it's just extraordinary, Chris, an extraordinary experience. And also, what an insight into, starting a business, managing a business and the outcome of a business, and then disposing of it through risk management.
There's a story about how Kerry Packer sold the business. I love this story. He had a director, an executive director on his board, and all he did was write a letter to say, you now own this business. I'm giving you a loan. Back then it was $4 million to buy this business off me. So Kerry Packer, at the stroke of a pen, no longer owned this toxic waste treatment business because he'd sold it to one of his directors, and he gave him a loan at the same time. So there was no money change hands. It was just the ownership. eventually Kerry needed to pull back that loan from that director. But it's just an interesting way of doing business.
Like dropping a hot potato. From a business and transformational viewpoint, what skills and strategies do you use to implement change management across organisations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am a data nerd, so I like detail and numbers, but also technology-driven solutions. The magic of information technology and now digital, technology as it's all pervasive is just amazing in that I like to have information that I can then seek to rely on in making a decision. So part of that is there's always risk and uncertainty. And so it's a matter of then having a proposal and an idea and then monitoring that to see if what you thought happened or was going to happen or was proposed to happen actually occurred. And then part of that is not just the technology, it's all around people actually. So the success I have is where I like to build and value people in an organization, but then have sort of technology provided evidence and analysis and input that then can help monitor and evaluate and change this, the activity as needed to try and achieve the outcome.
Getting people on board is the important thing for any change to occur. So in your charitable work, how do you do that?
That's a good one. It's an even, it does consume my every waking minute is about how to get the best out of, the organization and the team. And that's generally people rather than just, processes. Because it's the people that design and make the processes. And so you can have policies which tell people what to do or give direction, but it's actually people that make it all happen. And so several things. One is the voice of the customer or the voice of the community is so important, I believe. So things like if we're doing things to make the community better, then how do you know you're doing the right thing or whether it's actually working? And so that ability to listen and seek input and judgment from not only the staff, and that's quite important, but also then the clients or the customers, or in my current role, I have members that I look after.
It's about the alignment of the stakeholders and having the bigger vision and mission and everyone knowing what their role is in delivering the outcome.
And often in our pressure that we've got to do more. So I know people are very busy, and even with the staffing and skills, I'd argue there's a skill shortage. And if you look at the caring part of our community, aged care and community services, they're always crying out for more staff or in childcare, etc. So this issue is, really challenging on organisations on how to deliver when there's constraints around staffing and resources.
Culture is the cornerstone of effective working environment. Are there tips that you can share with your audience on how to have a winning culture?
I do sit on a board, and I know from my perspective, culture is led from the top of the organisation, so modelled by the senior team. And so I've been in situations where I've been in organisations where the culture is not the best and it's a challenge, and how to influence that culture from within. And there is merit in doing so. But I think the answer is actually having conversations about what is okay and what's not okay, and letting that then inform behaviour. And while it's admirable to have diversity and inclusion and mission and vision and value statements, if they're just written on paper and not lived by the team, then they're worthless. So it's then seeing how those aspirational, very often activities are actually then empowered and delivered, which is the real art to what I'd argue a high performing culture and a high performing team, so that you not only is it being modelled from the top, but then you're holding people accountable and responsible for their part in either clear communication, putting the clients first, being respectful, and all the other sorts of really positive values that you need to have as part of a high-performing organisation.
From the top, trickle down to the bottom, but individuals can also influence culture. They can destroy culture in an instant, or they can have the buy-in and, be part of that cultural experience within the workplace. Because you can have like that one person that's just going to be a thorn in everyone's side that will make things difficult. And I think culture's great when it's working, and then when there's challenges, I think that's when the cracks are revealed, and that's when leadership really needs to come into it. We're just talking about IT, and is it good for our community? Is it good for us as human beings? And I know, just as an example for myself, I had an event here recently and someone unplugged my NBN. It took me a week to work out that had been unplugged, and I was pretty much hijacked for a week using technology and email. And it was really quite scary just to think that was a local thing. But then I've had networks down in the area as well. And I think we're just vulnerable.
I know our community has moved to being digital first. So the point being, ability to communicate anywhere in the world and send a video or link to someone live anywhere in the world is just amazing. And that does bring people together, especially when you're geographically spread. But the point you're saying, our reliance on it, and in the old days, we used to speak about IT being commoditized. So in the past, it was very special and specialized, and now it's become just very commonplace. So you go and buy a phone and it's got internet, and you can send pictures and videos anywhere in the world and all that sort of thing. And so it has changed our community, and I'm not sure if it's changed the community for the better, because it's given the ability for false information to be spread a lot faster and have more impact on people. If you followed the anti-vaxxer movement, there was about 20 individuals in the US who sort of all got together and worked hard at just spreading a lot of doubt and fear into the community. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. And then not a day will go past and somebody's had their life savings, stolen by an online hacker, or even worse, what's happening in Australia with domestic violence and women at risk in the community, and discussion around technology now allowing young men to get access to pornography. For me, that is not a good thing, because it's changing the way in which our culture operates, and so it's making women less safe. I think there's a point now where the community, as in government, need to step up and actually take a stronger stance against these big multinational tech giants who are there just to commoditize and sell their services. Have what I call a more responsible approach to technology and its use.
There's talk now, suggestions that perhaps young people from the age of 16 onwards should be having access to mobile phones. Anyone younger than that, it's not a good thing. So I think there's a push for that. The other thing was old mobile phones being made available to people of domestic violence, and have them so that they're not tracked, so that they can make phone calls and have access to services. Technology allowed me to connect with my cousin in Montreal, and we met and we had wonderful holidays and experiences together. But that's the good side of technology, when technology is used as a tool and there's goodness, but there's the other side. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And I think
I'd argue that the communities had a light touch on the use of digital technology, and I think I'm not after what might be called a government-controlled state approach, e.g. like in China where they do block and turn off things. I'd argue that in Australia we've allowed the tech giants too much leeway, and it is causing harm in the community. And so how we can actually have a more responsible response does need legislation. It does need the community and government to actually step up. An example here in South Australia, where the South Australian Education Department, banned the use of mobile phones in the classroom or at school. And I think that's a really courageous and positive step forward to allowing then, reducing the risk of or the harm from bullying and the like. But, if someone needs to, be contacted, there are ways of making sure, in an emergency, we can contact people. So that's a good example of where just taking a step forward to make this a better community.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think the tech giants have a responsibility, and I think they have a responsibility also selling their services to a country, but not necessarily paying taxes, globally, contributing to the economy. It's take, and not give. And I don't know of transactions anywhere in the world that's ever been the case. I'm not sure. You're the economist here, but
Yeah, I did some analysis. I think Microsoft last year, declared a profit of 7 million, or it might have been 7 billion. It was a big number. The analysis by ASIC, one of the federal government agencies, felt as though that number, their real profit or whatever they should be paying tax on, would be something like 480, whether it's million or billion. It was big numbers. But their ability to have very good lawyers and dodge the domestic tax system, it is big business, which is disturbing, because arguably it's a bit like the casino industry, or if you call the online gaming industry as well, in that the damage that gets caused by people losing their life savings and becoming addicted to gambling is then picked up by the rest of the community, who has to sort of sort it out. The for-profit entities race away with massive profits, and then the community, government, the rest of us have to pick up the pieces.
There's inequity in that, and the vulnerability, and the fact that you can just gamble on your phone. You don't even have to leave your house. You can do it on a phone or a computer. And then you see the advertisement that, seek help. And I think people who are suffering in the community want quick fixes. They want that good feel release of hormones, and they get it through gambling. And it's just a good thing. I would love to hear about MedicAlert. So what started as a father's desire to protect his daughter from a fatal allergy became a mission for Dr. Marion and Chrissy Collins, who created the MedicAlert Foundation in 1956. And this was America's first universal symbol of medical identification. And I think this mission to save and protect lives by sharing vital medical information in moments of need, and it's quite powerful and personable. And it's a vision that's transformed life and healthcare ever since. And you are the Chief Executive of MedicAlert.
I am in a very privileged position. You are right. I am a security expert, as well as, with finance and other things, and the privilege to look after, hundreds of thousands of Australians' health information and make it available at point of care is a real privilege. MedicAlert started about 15 years after it commenced. MedicAlert in Australia started as a charity 15 years after it commenced in the US, with a number of physicians saying, let's get this service happening here in Australia. So in basically 1971, MedicAlert started, and it was supported by the Rotary Australia to help promote and look after vulnerable Australians. And 50 years later, we've moved from a reliance on a telephone-based health information service to now having a QR-enabled service where paramedics and healthcare professionals can get instant access to people's health information right at the point when they're treating them, without the need to get on the phone. People may recall the elliptical symbol of MedicAlert, and what we've done is been able to incorporate then a QR code and safely manage that. And what that means is, if someone's got a medical report or some emergency instructions, then all of that is instantly available to a clinician at point of care by the clinician's phone. So it could be a paramedic or an emergency medicine doctor in an emergency department or first aid officer or whatever. So we're really excited by this new breakthrough, which we launched only in August last year, so August 2023.
That's fascinating, Chris. So on the MedicAlert piece of, if you like, jewelry, whether it's bracelet or necklace or what have you, is that where the QR code is embedded?
So we're very excited. The MedicAlert was launched in August 2023, and we've now got over 90%, about 92% of our engraved products are going out with the QR on it. And our target when we planned the launch was to seek about 90%. So we're really pleased. And partly my role as the chief executive is to get more people out there. And the ambulance services have given me a challenge. They've said, okay, can we get one of these QR MedicAlerts on everybody that needs one? And so from their perspective, the ambulance services want to have the best information they can have on a person before or as they need to treat them at, in the community. And so they're seeing a partnership with the MedicAlert charity as a positive thing. So we're working really hard with our paramedic colleagues in each state to get them up to speed, as well as the universities who train the paramedics, so that the young people coming out are getting an understanding of the very latest technology that's there.
That's fantastic. Such an amazing initiative. So how do you get people to commit to adopting the MedicAlert, like individuals?
Yeah, it's a good question. My parents say, as a responsible child, I look at them and say, I think this is good for you. And so the ability to go online and take the lead and help someone get a MedicAlert, we can do that online. We also do have a team of people on the phone that are there to service and look after people. The whole idea is how to look after people who have chronic health needs. And say, for example, next week is Heart Week. The ambulance officers have said to us, look, if someone has a heart condition, if you can have a copy of their baseline ECG available on their QR MedicAlert, that's gold for us, so that if we get called out, we can get to see what's the normal heart rhythm and heartbeat, and then compare that to what they might take at the point of care. And so that message on that's just one example for people with, cardiac challenges. But from my perspective, I'm keen to help, answer the call that the ambulance officers have given us to say, how do we, look after people and get a MedicAlert on everyone that needs one?
So how do you get the baseline onto the MedicAlert?
Yeah, that's good. Good question. So we've got two ways of doing it. Well, there's more than two, but two ways of doing it. So one way is we engage with the treating physician, so like a GP, and just ask for a health summary. And so that's a document that then can be uploaded, which you've then got things like care plans, advanced care directives, and other sort of documents. And then my team either can take those and put them up on the person's health record, and that's what we do. Or if someone's digitally literate and able to get onto it, they can just simply do the same and have that information. So there's about 8 areas of key information that the healthcare professionals have asked to have available. That can be things like, your health conditions, but your medications. It can be your emergency instructions. So if someone has an allergy or something, you can say my anaphylactic pen is in my backpack, or that sort of information can all be available. In the old days, you could only engrave a very small amount of information on a little piece of jewelry. So the QR code has just almost made it unlimited amount of information that can be given to a healthcare professional to get the best care for someone that needs it.
That's fabulous. What is the rate of people who forget to wear their MedicAlerts? Is that an issue?
So if I said MedicAlert, very often people think it's the electronic fall alarm and monitors. And so part of the challenge even with that technology is that people often at night, they might have to charge up their MedicAlerts, as in those fall alarms. And so they then get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or something and have an episode and have an episode in a fall, and the thing they need to keep them safe is sitting on the charger in the bedroom. So the issue of wearing it, what we've tried to do under my watch is to make some of the jewelry a little bit less, a little bit more attractive, I'll call it. So the idea is you want things to be, people feel proud and want to wear. So we've sort of worked with some jewelers to design things that people might feel proud to wear rather than feeling as though that's a bit daggy, and bringing it to the 21st century with the sort of QR technology. That's right.
That's fabulous. Do people sleep with this jewellery on?
Very often. So, yeah, so if you were, say, going to the gym, you wouldn't want to wear a nice, pristine gold or gold-plated one. You might have a more, silicon-based, softer one that you might wear in the gym. And pretty well people just get used to wearing them. We've got some for young children, children with autism are sensitive to their situation. So there's a whole range of different engraved products. The irony is we actually do compete against some for-profit multinationals who also do sell their products and services. Being a charity based here in Australia, we are under the pump about what we can offer and how we can support. But I have a really supportive board, and our mission is to look after people who need support. And so often it's like a lot of people may be in denial that they need something like a MedicAlert, either an electronic fall alarm or, in our case, the access to people's health information at point of care. So from our perspective, if you've got someone that you care for, MedicAlert is like a gift of love.
How do you raise money for this charity?
Yeah, it's good. We actually don't currently receive any government money, so that's probably an important point. We do rely on donations from the public and from what we call our members, so people who are part of the service. And part of the role we've had was to say, let's partner with some larger organisations to seek how we can do more. So some of the for-profit organisations to see if MedicAlert can partner and we can do more. So an example might be the Hutt Street Centre with homeless people. And how do we help work together to get a MedicAlert on everyone that needs one? And the homeless community is quite interesting because that ability to have access to your health information is more problematic. You're on the move and you don't have a stable house. The MedicAlert QR is a really, really good thing. Just raise awareness. We charge a fee for our service. So basically there's about $1 a week charge to have your QR service provided, so about $50, $55 a year. The cost of a piece of jewellery to look after, which might be 50 or 100, or it can go up to thousands if you're buying solid gold.
There's something for everyone.
That's a good way of looking at it.
What are the challenges with data security?
So we've done a lot of work in making this safe. So MedicAlerts is a trusted entity, and so part of this discussion is about being risk averse. So how do we provide people's health information at point of care? And the QR is different to, say, a telephone where you can challenge somebody about who they are and the like. So the QR in itself is designed with the paramedics to be as open as possible. So the idea being, if someone needs access, don't try and put a block in the way if I'm trying to help this person, make it as quick as we can. What we've actually done is, instead of people putting people's full name, it'll be their first name. Instead of their date of birth, it'll be their age. Instead of their address, it'll be a location. And so the whole idea, the first instance, is a paramedic or a healthcare professional can get what they need immediately available. We do checking on the background, so we'll monitor the device that's been used to access the QR. And we also give an alert back to whoever the person's nominated to say this medical alert has been opened or has been used at this time on this place. So part of that is a way in which, let's say if I had a young child and I was concerned about them and they might have some allergies, I'll then have a medical alert. And if that medical alert is triggered, I'll get it on my phone to say, little Johnny's medical alert's been scanned. Gives two things. One, to know that something's happened, and also then we can manage if it's been nefariously used, as in not correctly used, and we need to turn it off. We can do all that, but at least it gives transparency. Paramedics helped us design this QR medical alert, and what they said is things like having an ECG of a patient is gold. You want to know if the person you're looking at as a paramedic is the person whose medical alert you're reading. And so we also have a photo. We've sort of pushed really hard to have an image so that a treating physician can look at the person and say, yes, this is the person's record I'm looking for. There's a few other pieces that we've got in the way of the security, but we hold the data in Australia on a secure environment, supported by what they call Amazon Web Services, sort of monitor and track the access and use on every occasion and deal with that as we need to.
That sounds like some great protocols are in place, especially the photo ID, because I was just thinking as you're talking, what are the chances if someone got theirs mixed up, if both parties have it and they've got the wrong one on a particular day?
So an ambulance officer will want to have 3 checks, 3 different sources of identity to know that this is the person they're dealing with. So it could be saying what's your date of birth, or it could be a visual check, or in our case the engraved medical alert is. So that all adds up to having confidence that the treatment they're about to give is for the right person.
Do the ambulance officers use their phone to scan the medical alert?
That's how it works. So the idea is the medical alert QR is more for the healthcare professional to get instant access at point of care. And so the ambulance officers would use their issued phone and receive and act on that information. However, if someone, say, comes from a non-English speaking background, if their health information can be available, then if they go to speak to a physician or a clinician, a new doctor, or a chemist or something, and say, I don't speak much English, but they can get that person to scan their QR-enabled medical alert and get access to their health information without that issue of language barriers preventing clear information being provided.
So it really has eliminated some major obstacles in first responders, in healthcare, and across the board for people who are vulnerable.
It's a balance between access to information at point of care and locking it down and making it so protected that it becomes impossible or nearly impossible to get access to.
But is it recognised in other countries?
Interestingly, Australia, as I said, started in 1971, so approximately 15 years after it started in the US. And so it exists in places like Zimbabwe. It exists in South Africa, Canada, New Zealand, in the UK. So there's about 9 countries around the world where a medical alert is realised and recognised. If you're going to Europe and having your health information there available at point of care, that's available anywhere in the world where there's internet, assuming that the country hasn't blocked the internet. We've tried to make the system as open as possible. And of course, we still have a 24/7 emergency telephone response that we offer as well.
You've also got rebates and funding.
We've just come through having Anzac Day and commemorating people that have served for the country. And so people who are on a gold card, veterans and their families, the Department of Veterans Affairs funds a medical alert, not the expensive precious metal ones, but a relatively standard medical alert. And people who are on a silver card, where the health conditions that they're having to deal with are part of their service for the country, they also are eligible for a medical alert. the NDIS in terms of people living with disability. So, and then the aged care funding. So there are different funding sources that people can use to cover the cost of a MedicAlert.
That makes it more accessible to the community and to those in need. That's fantastic.
MedicAlert as a charity, we also try and go out of our way to look after people who need one. And probably my call to action, as I said earlier, from the ambulance services are get a MedicAlert on everyone that needs one. That's the challenge that I'm responding to, and I work with my team to see how we can make that happen.
So that's your recommendation to anyone thinking of a MedicAlert? Just do it.
That's right. It is peace of mind. You can manage what's on your own MedicAlert health record.
Okay, so it can be personalised. You can put as much information in or as little.
That's right.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about MedicAlert?
Yes, I might share a program we're running with the police departments. With the growing rates of dementia in the community, it actually takes a lot of police resources when people go missing. That can be both from Alzheimer's and dementia or from brain-acquired injury from motor vehicle accidents or falling off a ladder. Working in partnership with the WA Police, we've got a program called Safe and Found, which we designed and developed with the WA Police, and we're working now to take that to each and every other jurisdictional police department. And the whole idea that it actually saves time and resourcing when someone goes missing. And we, being skilled and privileged to hold people's information, can then have that provided to the police when there's an emergency search and rescue operation needing to be undertaken. We're really excited about that. We've just gone over, we're hitting about 130 safe recoveries in WA since we launched. That's just over 2 years ago. What that means is that family and friends and carers have peace of mind that the police can get on and search for these people. And what we call a lost person behaviour profile that looks at people's interests. So someone likes water, or they like trains, or they like flowers or something. The police can have not only their previous addresses, and often people with dementia will go back to where they used to work or used to live. And so the police are able to task their resources, and it's been a really successful program that we've run in partnership with WA Police. So we're excited to extend that nationally.
That's so innovative. Chris, that's amazing.
It's also now been picked up by the people in Canada, that my MedicAlert equivalents in there, and also in the UK. So picking up on what we've pioneered here in Australia.
We're very proud of that. How do you stay motivated, Chris?
And part of it's the joy of working with people, actually. My motivation comes from, I like creative, innovative ideas. And so then it's the matter of, okay, we can have the idea, and then how do we get the team or get people together to make it happen? For me, that's really exciting. I'm probably more on the extrovert side, but I am also a deep thinker. Part of this discussion is, how do we as a community improve the well-being of particularly vulnerable and disadvantaged people is what drives me, be it Indigenous folk, be it homeless people, be it people with chronic and complex health conditions. So that's probably what motivates me around the role that I've got, and working with various community and staff to achieve that.
Who's your biggest inspiration?
So I do like people who are successful. So that's probably creative thoughts. So I do like what Mr. Obama did when he became the President of the United States. He introduced more equitable health care for disadvantaged in the community. And for me, in Australia, we've grown up with Medicare, and we know that there's a baseline support for people. That's not the case in other countries. President Obama, when he came into power, took that on as a real mission. That's, for me, is probably a motivator for me.
He did some amazing work, and I think it was a wonderful example of what's possible to transform the healthcare in a country, making it more equitable. Is there a particular book that's helped your mindset?
I do like reading lots of different books, so it's probably fair. There's no one book. I take insight and like to get lots of input from lots of ideas. So be them Eastern philosophy or business, as well as social.
Like, I think about myself, and I think a book that made a difference to my life when I was younger was In Search of Excellence and The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People were two books that really changed the way that I looked at life and business when I was in my younger years. So I kind of look at those as books that influence my thinking. I'm also a reader of various genres and business books and inspiration and psychology. So, Chris, I'm certain you've had some highs and you've had some challenges. Can you share one of the greatest challenges you faced and how did you manage it?
Okay, you're right. In different ways, I've had lots of different challenges. So if I said the job I've got now is a challenge because I'm turning an organization that's 50 years old into a sort of a digitally enabled organization. So we're a caring organization, but the ability for the foundation, as in the MedicAlert charity, to operate is because we've had some investments that generate revenue, which offsets our operating deficit. So that means to deliver our services and look after people, we spend more money than we receive. So the board have said to me, look, Chris, can you see if we can get the organisation to be financially sustainable? And that means that the costs and the activity is sort of breaks even and doesn't just purely rely on the investment returns. That is proving to be quite a challenge as of living charges and electricity and staff costs and everything else, and even product costs have all been going up. So my costs are going up and I need to motivate and get the team onto our more revenues. The good thing about it is my board are on song with us. It's a voluntary board and they're all there working together with myself and the team. And so what I've agreed upon that we're all the one team working together to achieve this. I did have a rather unfortunate situation when I was walking to work one day where I was attacked by probably a fellow who had some drug related problems. And he ended up chasing me and eventually punched me down. That occurred about 3 months before I joined MedicAlert. And crossing the parklands there, this fellow obviously took a shining to the hat that I was wearing. He sort of was threatening me and trying to punch me and, all the rest of it. And eventually he got my hat. But even then he didn't stop. He still wanted to come and punch me and chase me. And for me, probably has taught me that I've still got a little bit of trauma that I need to work out of my life because I don't want to be prejudiced towards someone in the community that either looks like this fellow or behaves like this fellow and feel and live in fear. So that's probably my piece in that space.
That would have been horrific, Chris. There's no doubt about it. You're a solid, tall man, very different perhaps to a petite woman or some other vulnerable child in that situation. And, this affected you greatly, obviously. So are you going to get help for this? What can you do for yourself to navigate this and address those fears and those challenges?
I did have a trauma response when I went interstate and stayed at a hotel, and I had a fellow walk into the hotel foyer who looked like the fellow who attacked me. I had this going, oh gosh, this is a bit scary. So you're right, I've probably got a little bit more work to do there around moving forward. I was well looked after at the time, and just to help you understand, if someone has a medical episode and has to go to, say, the public hospital emergency department, you'll know you'll be in there for a long stint of time. And so after this particular incident, an attack had happened, I chose not to go to the public hospital, but went to a local medical practice who sat me down with a cup of tea and looked after me and patched me up into my cuts and bruises. People were really nice to me, but the issue was the fellow was from a different ethnic background. I'm sort of probably try and accept people as they are and welcome people into my life, but that sort of did cause me some grief.
And trauma can take a while to process, and then you don't know when it's going to get triggered. That's the other thing. So I suppose that we need to have some coping mechanisms.
I do have a lot of caring, loving friends and family around, and I do obviously enjoy a sense of humour to help me get through what might be difficult situations, I suppose.
This would have been some of your memorable highs.
Okay. One of the things I did that I really enjoyed was working with the former Premier of Queensland, a fellow named Wayne Goss. So he'd been brought down to South Australia by the state government to make the public service in South Australia work more effectively. And so I had the pleasure of working as part of what was called the Government Reform Commission. And in that process, I did a couple of major projects. One was to negotiate with all the government agencies and departments to get uniform government regions for the state. And so that had been something that had been aspired for over 25 years. And I used my negotiation and relationship building and support, and so then managed to agree upon 12 uniform regions that the state has for. The theory is to help government agencies work better together. So the issue was sometimes you go into a meeting and there'll be someone from the health department and someone from the education department and someone from the social services or someone else from the police, and they're all got different jurisdictional responsibility, and so it's very hard to get everybody in the same room to talk about and how we work and solve wicked problems. So the uniform regional boundaries was a way in which you could start to get the right people in the room with the community. So these boundaries were based on local council as well as then aligning it with the state government. So that was probably one of my highlights in my career.
That's wonderful. Creating a platform where people can communicate effectively and have input regardless of what their jurisdiction is. Comes back to effective communication, and through that you can have amazing outcomes.
Yes, probably a second highlight was probably working with Indigenous communities across Western Australia, South Australia and Northern Territory. In one of my roles with what was called DataLink, I had one of my team responsible for negotiating access to Indigenous controlled health service organisations' data. And so for the very first time, a lot of these entities were very gun shy and hesitant about sharing their data. And so through the safe and trusted method that DataLink had, we were able to negotiate the very first time that some of those Aboriginal controlled health services data would be shared and used for sort of policy planning, evaluation, monitoring and research. That in itself felt really important. There were, well over 50 different organisations, Aboriginal organisations, data brought together to sort of do some really what I call important work around health services for the vulnerable and less fortunate Australians.
Yes, and did you see some major wins in that area?
That's a good question. I was like the enabler. So my job was to negotiate and facilitate and deal with data security and all those sort of bits and bobs, data governance. And then the arrangements were done through some of the Indigenous researchers getting access to what I'll call de-identified data. So it was protecting people's privacy and being able to then undertake their analysis and work. I'm sort of like, in that case, I'm like a back office person that just enables things to happen rather than the person up the front that does all the exciting work, if you like.
I understand. You're the brains behind the whole thing. We'll put it mildly.
Taking up opportunities that were presented and thinking outside the square a little bit to think, okay, how can we make this possible, rather than settling back and saying, oh, we've never done that before. We tried that and it failed and that never worked and all that. And so those sort of things are really motivating for me. So I get excited by that sort of sense of doing something that people have found really hard to do before. Let's see what we can do.
It's the idea of possibilities. Did you have someone in your business life that made all the difference?
Okay, I'll try. One fellow I really did like working with, you might remember Harley Ladd Curtains and Blinds.
Oh, yes.
He was a larger-than-life character. He's passed away now, but I got to meet Harley Ladd, and his business, he had an idea that he said, you're either living in fear or you're living in love. So it was a simple thing of going, you're either operating fearfully and negatively and down, or you're trusting and working in joy and peace and love. So that was a really simplistic way of thinking about it. And he'd hold his hand out and he'd have his hand up and say, like his palm up, and say, you're either operating in love, or he'd turn his hand over and it's sort of down and you're operating in fear. So it was just more of that awareness of what's happening inside you and what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and being able to then have greater control over that rather than being subject to it, and then making a better choice.
I love that analogy. I think it's important, because fear is face everything and run, or face everything and rise. Even two ways you can look at fear. But yeah, operating from love, I think love is full of possibilities. Love is goodness. It has a different vibration. And fear will keep you constrained, contained, agitated. Yeah, great advice. What are your personal benchmarks for success?
I do set lots of goals to achieve, and a lot of them I don't achieve. So that's probably a fair way of thinking about it. I do stretch and have stretch targets. Part of the challenge then is to say, okay, can we bring everyone on the ride? So get people's hearts and minds committed to the goals and the objectives. And then what happens if it doesn't work? So then it's that whole human nature of how do you deal with disappointment, or how do you recalibrate and take it forward still? That's the art of working with people, isn't it? So that you want to motivate and have aspirational targets and goals, but you've also got to be mindful that you don't want to undermine it by sort of thinking, oh, we're not going to achieve that. But then it's a matter of just hoping to bring everyone together on the journey, so that it's new possibilities and opportunities can be sort of taken advantage of and move forwards. One of my favorite quotes is from John Lennon, which is, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And so from my perspective, I'm a planner. So I like to plan, think what is possible and what we can achieve. But then what happens is life gets in the way, and then you've got to be adaptive and responsive and listen, and not then lose heart in terms of what you're trying to achieve.
It's about agility, I think, Chris. Being agile enough to change the plan if the plan isn't working.
So there is something in there about emotional intelligence, a discussion about command and control in a typical project management discipline, where you've said you were going to deliver that on this date, and why haven't you done it, and all that sort of stuff. And understanding the human dynamic and how to achieve and motivate people, and what's a driver for one person might be a debilitating for another. And so probably comes back to a second person, which was the Jack Odie discussion, where Jack Odie, as a master coach, he'd treat each individual person uniquely and listen and respond and give advice and direction that was tailored to that person to get the best out of them. So he had insight around what was motivational, what was needed, what was important, and he'd tailor the message to a point where he might say the exact opposite to two people standing next to each other. I just found that also important.
It's the use of psychology and understanding human behaviour.
It's also wisdom, I think, somewhere there too.
Yeah. And as a coach, he would have
Mm.
that experience and wisdom and understanding people. And there's also like the abundance mindset or the growth mindset or the fixed mindset, where a growth mindset, everything's possible, everything can be managed, we'll get through it to the end somehow. The fixed mindset is, oh no, those parameters, these are the parameters, we're not moving from here, and not much can happen in that realm, if you like. I think you've just articulated that a couple of minutes ago.
Almost self-defeating in a way, that sort
Yeah.
of fixed thinking, especially because things do change. The past is a useful guide for the future, but it doesn't dictate what the future is.
And I think the only certainty we have in life is change. So, Chris, let's look at 22 questions, short, sharp, one-word responses, where possible, to tie up our interview. It's been wonderful so far to hear everything about your career and the people who've influenced your life. So, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you.
What makes you smile?
Cute animals.
What's your favourite cuisine?
Greek.
If you could travel anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Antarctica.
Do you prefer to text, call, voicemail, or other?
I'm probably face-to-face, so that would be other.
Uh-huh. Do you play a musical instrument? Do you sing, dance, or hum?
I'm a singer, actually, so
Are you?
yeah.
Might have to talk about that in a minute. What's your happy place?
Being out in nature, so nature.
Favorite city and why?
Bordeaux, with a French cuisine, wine, and some lovely architecture.
Favorite coffee?
Flat white.
What movie would you recommend?
Casablanca.
Do you have a favorite song or artist?
Van Morrison.
Do you prefer white wine, red wine, or champagne?
I love red wine.
What's your biggest strength?
Persistence.
If you could catch up with anyone, who would it be?
Barack Obama.
What's your favorite meal? Breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
Dinner.
What's your favorite time of day?
I like the mornings.
What was the best holiday you've ever had?
Going to Banff Springs in the Canadian Rockies.
Do you enjoy sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
Do you speak another language?
A little bit of French and Italian.
Is there a cause you're passionate about besides MedicAlert?
Empowering people.
If you could have 3 guests at your table, who would they be?
Okay, I'm going to go for the Australian Minister of Health and Ageing, Mark Butler. There's the Shadow Minister for Health and Ageing, Anne Ruston, and the CEO of Qantas, Vanessa Hudson.
If you're a hashtag, what would it be?
Data saves lives, which is one I use.
Oh, it is the one you use. Fantastic. Now, can we go back to the singing for a minute?
Yeah.
Tell me about your singing.
I actually went to the Elder Conservatory of Music as a singer. And unfortunately, I was playing league football at the time, and I received an elbow to my larynx, which fractured my larynx. And I then ended up having to relearn how to sing.
Oh, really? Oh, my goodness. See, persistence. It's there, right?
That's right. So from a point of a career where I potentially had a professional career singing, I then have had to focus on other things, other opportunities.
Oh, wow. That would have been an incredible experience and disappointment all at the same time. Get on with life. But you sing
That's right.
at home.
I do like singing, yes.
And
at work here.
And at work, karaoke?
No, just without backing, yeah.
I love it. Oh, Chris, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Business Class Collective podcast.
Thank you,
And
Jenny.
I will include your contact details in the show notes where people can get in contact with you in MedicAlert and learn more about your organisation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Business Class presented by Eugenia Panterhos, founder of Business Class Collective. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, subscribe, rate and review this podcast. Share the love and let your family and friends know too. You can follow Business Class Collective on Instagram and Facebook. Join me next time.